Matt Shaw's decision to skip Sunday's Cubs-Reds game to attend Charlie Kirk's memorial in Arizona landed like a thunderclap. A 23-year-old rookie choosing a private, faith-based obligation over a late-season contest that mattered for playoff positioning, and then owning the choice in public. Shaw says he felt compelled to be there after being invited by Kirk's widow and because of a personal friendship and shared faith. The Cubs cleared him to go. Chicago Sun-Times context matters because timing matters. The game he missed was a 1-0 loss, and with the postseason chase tight, every game carries outsized consequences. That's why fans and pundits reacted sharply when the absence became public. In tight races, availability is a currency, and teammates and sometimes entire fan bases treat it as such. The political heat only amplified the optics. The memorial itself was a highly visible, politically charged event attended by prominent public figures, which turned an otherwise private act of condolence into something that read loudly in the public square. Axios. The core arguments for and against Shaw's choice are straightforward and hinge on two competing priorities. On one side, personal obligation, faith, and human relationships. Shaw described a real personal connection to Kirk, the sort of relationship athletes sometimes develop with non-sporting figures who offer mentorship or spiritual support. And he said attending was really important to him. When a teammate or friend asks you to be present for a life milestone or a funeral, many people will understand why you'd go, regardless of work pressures. The club's permission also matters. The Cubs reportedly supported the absence, which signals that internally the decision had at least managerial consent, rather than being a secretive unilateral move. Chicago Sun-Times. On the other side, duty to the team and the perception of priorities. Broadcasters like Gary Cohen and former player Todd Zeile publicly framed the choice as unusual and unprecedented, noting that leaving in the middle of a race feels odd unless it's a family emergency. Media commentary has leaned into that intuition. Professional athletes are paid to perform and be available, especially down the stretch. Even if a team grants permission, the optics of a rostered player flying to a high-profile memorial while a must-win ball game is underway creates an image problem that can distract a clubhouse and a fan base during a fragile period. Fox News. There's also the broader environment. The memorial was not a quiet, small wake. It drew tens of thousands and high-profile names, making Shaw's attendance far more visible than a private trip would have been. That visibility makes private motives public and invites political framing. If the person being memorialized is a polarizing public figure, as in this case, then attendance by a team member is inevitably interpreted through partisan lenses, regardless of the attendee's personal intent. That's a key reason the reaction has not been uniform. Some critics see it as a personal choice and an act of conscience, while others see it as a politically loaded gesture that a public team employee should avoid during crucial competition. Fox News, how this plays out practically for the Cubs has multiple layers. First, clubhouse morale. The team publicly backed Shaw, which helps contain internal dissent, but public commentary from national voices can still create friction. Teammates who stayed and played may privately feel a twinge, especially in a 1-0 loss, and that can seed locker room chatter. Second, fan relations and brand risk. With the Cubs' national profile, anything that looks like political alignment or partisan signaling triggers sponsors, media narratives, and local stakeholders. The organization will be mindful of that as it manages both PR and ticket sales during a playoff push. Third, precedent. Younger players often model behavior on each other. Clubs want to avoid a situation where high-visibility personal choices become recurring distractions in clutch moments. Axios. There's a narrow path the Cubs can take to minimize damage while honoring both club stability and individual conscience. First, transparent communication. The team should explain succinctly and respectfully how the decision was approved and why it was handled the way it was. Secrecy fuels suspicion. Second, management can reinforce norms about availability during the pennant race while allowing for bona fide family or faith obligations, clearly differentiating personal emergencies from elective absences. Third, performative neutrality in public messaging helps. Avoid turning club statements into political statements. The less the organization is seen as endorsing a political position, the easier it is for fans across the spectrum to focus on baseball. MLB.com. For Shaw personally, the calculus is already clear. He defended his choice, saying it was what meant the most to me, and indicated he isn't worried about backlash. That resolve can be admirable, it shows conviction, but it also means he must be ready to repair any trust chips through his play and presence. In professional sports, actions are often forgiven faster when they're followed by consistent availability and on-field contributions. If Shaw returns and makes a tangible difference in the Cubs' push, public sentiment is likely to cool. If the team stumbles and the absence remains a recurring talking point, the episode could linger. Chicago Sun-Times. Finally, a broader observation. Modern pro sports are increasingly a media ecosystem where private choices become public signals. Athletes do not operate in a vacuum, and every decision outside the lines can feed a national conversation that has little to do with the sport itself. Teams and players must navigate that reality intentionally, weigh personal convictions against professional obligations, consult with clubs on optics and timing, and understand that permission from management is a necessary but not sufficient buffer against public scrutiny. In the end, Shaw's case is a collision of human loyalty and institutional expectation. There are defensible moral claims on both sides, honoring a personal, faith-based relationship and the expectation of presence during a late-season stretch. How Cubs leadership, teammates, and fans choose to interpret the act will depend less on a single statement than on what happens next, on how Shaw shows up, how the team responds publicly and privately, and whether the on-field outcome softens or sharpens the debate. Chicago Sun-Times. Did a Cubs rookie choose loyalty over the pennant race? And did he make the right call? Matt Shaw thinks so, and his decision to miss Chicago's game to attend Charlie Kirk's memorial has roiled fans, pundits, and the clubhouse alike. Shaw told reporters he knew Kirk personally. They lived in the same apartment building in Arizona, and that Kirk had been a consistent supporter, texting after games and cheering him on. When Kirk's family invited Shaw to the private service in Glendale, he says it felt like something he couldn't skip. The Cubs organization, he added, gave him their blessing. That's the personal side. The public response was immediate and intense. Critics called the move unusual and questioned why a player would step away from his team in the middle of a tight playoff stretch for anyone who wasn't immediate family. Some broadcasters and former players described it as unprecedented. Social feeds filled with takes about responsibility, optics, and whether professional athletes owe the club presence above personal obligations. Then there's the political lightning rod. Charlie Kirk was a polarizing national figure, and the memorial drew high-profile attendees, names that have only magnified the controversy. Even though Shaw says his decision was about friendship and faith, not ideology, the symbolism is hard to ignore. High-profile funerals aren't private in a vacuum. Attendance inevitably reads as a statement, whether the attendee intends it that way or not. Inside the clubhouse, the picture is more nuanced. Shaw says teammates supported his choice and that the front office approved the absence. That internal backing matters. Teams often allow personal time for weddings, funerals, and family emergencies, and by Shaw's account, this was treated in the same vein. From a locker room perspective, a player stepping away for a meaningful loss can be seen as an act of loyalty, not disloyalty. On the flip side, public-facing teams have to manage optics because availability matters in professional sports. Missing a game in a playoff race invites scrutiny, and when the team lost 1-0 that day, critics amplified the narrative. There's also a communication angle. Some observers said the absence should have been disclosed earlier to avoid confusion and speculation during the game. So what's the fair takeaway? There isn't a tidy answer. Shaw's choice sits at the intersection of private loyalty and public accountability. If you view the move purely as a personal act of respect for a friend, it's understandable. If you view it through the lens of organizational responsibility and public perception, it's a risk. For the Cubs, the immediate concern is on field, how the roster responds, and whether the team can absorb short-term absences without losing momentum. For Shaw, the challenge will be rebuilding any lost public goodwill and letting his play on the field define him more than one controversial absence. In the end, this is a modern sports story. Private relationships collide with public platforms, and the simplest human choices become national conversations. Whether you side with Shaw or with his critics, one fact remains: athletes today must navigate not only performance, but also the optics of every decision.